Hello, welcome to Brain Club, the podcast, a space for learning, unlearning, and reimagining new ways of being together in neuro-inclusive community. I'm Dr. Mel Houser, Executive Director of All Brains Belong Vermont. Welcome to our brand new podcast. Brain Club is All Brains' full weekly community education program where we demonstrate our approach to neuro-inclusive culture through community panels, guest speakers, and book chats. It's a place where we shift broader community awareness about the issues of concern and importance to neurodivergent people in our community and promote new ways of thinking and being in community together. It's a place where we transform culture by modeling what's possible with the idea that then you go out into the rest of your lives and carry it forward. You can already access all the recordings from our website at allbrainsbelong.org, but our community asked us to turn it into a podcast, so here we are. These conversations are not medical advice and they're not support groups. They're an invitation to think differently about health, connection, and how we build systems that include everyone. Each episode features community panelists sharing perspectives and lived experiences. We hope you'll listen with curiosity and reflect on what it brings up for your own life. In this conversation with neuroaffirming workplace advocate and disability rights attorney Annie Crowe, we talk about the nervous system toll of navigating workplaces built around neuronormativity. From inaccessible environments to systemic bias and intersectional harm, this episode explores why so many neurodivergent people experience work as dysregulating, and what shifts are possible both internally and collectively once we begin to name the problem.
It's so good to be here, and thank you for having me, Mel. Love talking to you and picking your brilliant brain and helping our community in any way possible.
Right back at you. So, we started this conversation when you interviewed me for your podcast. Princess and the Pea will link in the chat, which is an amazing resource, an amazing community. So we started talking about neuroimmune health and burnout and the relationship. The circular relationship rate of burnout and employment. So I wonder for you, and based on your own personal experience and the clients you work with, I'd love to hear what you'd say about that. And we'd also love to hear more about you and the work you do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Please do pull me back on track if I digress, because I tend to do that even more when I'm sick. But anyway, so basically burnout, what I do, so it's interesting. The space that I work in is heavily dominated by mostly allied health professionals, so psychologists, dietitians, physios, that sort of thing, occupational therapists, speech pathologists. And the reason for that here in Australia, at least, is that they tend to be the people who get referred. They tend to be the people that autistic people get sent to for help. And so I'm a very unique person in this space because my background's human rights law. I've spent the last decade working both in private practice and for the Australian government in the national sort of security space. And I have had so much of my own health journey, lots of complex health problems, all the things as we have. And it took me years of seeing every specialist under the sun and trying to advocate for my own healthcare and, being able to actually maintain employment while dealing with complex health and disability. And I never got the proper labels until I was in my late 20s. And so really it was a big shift for me. It's many years ago now, but I sort of thought, well, this is ridiculous that it took so long for people to put the pieces together and get to the core at what my struggles were. And then it was a big shock to me because I thought things would get better. When I found out I was autistic and ADHD and neurodivergent, I thought, this is great. Finally, I'm going to be able to have my access needs met because I'll be able to walk into any office, any employer, any doctor, anything and say, well, I'm autistic. And they're going to just naturally, maybe not employment so much, but healthcare you'd expect, right, would just naturally know that I had certain things that needed to be adapted, including sensory needs and different communication. And that was absolutely not the case at all. And so I did try initially to persevere in my more traditional employment. And, I disclosed at work and they were very kind and supportive, but the translation beyond being accepting and, tokenistic on the front, very well meaning, was just not there. They wouldn't respect my wishes for, limited phone calls. This was early COVID, so work from home was becoming normal. And so really it was a big tipping point for me to say, well, that's it. I'm going to start advocating and speaking out. And it just kind of skyrocketed. I've only been doing this for about 15 months now. And the minute I started talking publicly about my own experience, I was inundated with people from all around the world, and still to this day get multiple messages a day. It's very overwhelming, sharing so many shared lived experiences of burnout and discrimination and just inaccessible healthcare, inaccessible employment. And so now I consult. So I consult government, and I consult organizations and health professionals that want to become more neuroaffirming and accessible. And I also coach neurodivergent, mostly adults, but also I've recently been getting a lot more parents reaching out, especially in the eating disorder space, which is one of my little niches. I started a not-for-profit last year on eating disorders, but that's another topic. And yeah, so basically I sort of consider myself, I suppose, I call myself a neurodivergent empowerment coach, but to me, what that really means is focusing on, we're a group of people, like most minorities, that are oppressed and are discriminated against and have access needs. And so my form of empowerment is helping people self-advocate, whether that's at work or in healthcare or education, to have their needs met. And the biggest barrier there I find with a lot of my clients is that, it's so great when we've finally got the label and the language. See, he wants a treat. Sit down. We've finally got the label and the language, but then we're still limited by a society that has such limited beliefs. I was just thinking yesterday, I was interviewed on national television here in December on a piece on social media and autism and ADHD. And they used me as the segue from I think it was a psychiatrist or a researcher, saying that there was so much misinformation on TikTok and Instagram and stuff. And me basically saying, yeah, but is it really a problem if it's helping people like actually go and seek help and find out about themselves? But then I sort of thought to myself, I've just been reflecting recently, and I'm like, I think the issue here is actually that, and I'm not poo-pooing professionals or anything like that, but I think we need to be quite critical of, and this is why I love Mel's work so much, because Mel's done the work, and Mel and her team have really unpacked their own biases and the system that they were, trained in, which is sadly quite rare. But, and I promise I have a point, I think the issue isn't that there's a lack of, misinformation. I think the issue is that most of the professionals have such a limited view of what it is to be autistic, ADHD, neurodivergent. And so when they see stuff on social media where you've got hundreds of autistic people sharing their lived experience and them looking at that and going, well, that's not in the DSM, so that's inaccurate. Is it? Or is the DSM limited? And this is very relevant for employment and burnout and access, because when I help, sadly, so many adults who are getting really blatantly discriminated against at work, whether they're losing their jobs or getting put on performance reviews or all of those sort of things, where they're going into work and saying, I have these access needs, and work is saying, well, that's not autism, or having these very limited beliefs on, that autistic people just need like less eye contact and no bright lights, which we all know is the most limited view you could possibly have of our access needs. So really, what I help people do is find the language and articulate what they truly need to have meaningful access to employment, so that they're not in perpetual burnout, which is such a we call it autistic burnout for a reason. Our community is constantly in burnout from basically existing in a world that refuses to accommodate us. And so my business, my consulting firm, is called Neuro-Access. And the point of that is that, aligned with the social model of disability, for me, it's really about, we need to shift this perspective and really focus on these environments and make the people in positions of power and privilege take responsibility in helping us access employment, healthcare, you name it, in a nutshell. Yeah. I'm a busy person and I could use more help. So anyone who wants to advocate in this space, do reach out. I sort of try to mentor some people to get more of us out there. We need so many more voices.
Amen to that. And I just popped some links in the chat, Annie's podcast, as well as the website for Neuro Access. So a lot of times, people will say, all right, so now I know burnout's a thing. Now what? And I say, there's no magic, right? You have to, there really needs to be some shifts in how much you're draining your battery versus how much you're charging your battery. And employment is a huge drain on battery. And it's almost like, so to be able to access one's cortex, have the executive functioning skills required to self-advocate, that you don't have access to that. You're just drowning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, and that's the thing, I think another problem that I see really often is that, we are perpetually in burnout, or we recover and then go back into burnout. And so many people get confused by that because they're like, well, I've made changes and I'm trying to find that balance and put things in place to prevent this happening. But the problem is that no matter how hard we try, on an individual level, we're still constantly butting heads with this system that remains inaccessible. Like, you could have the most amazing employer, the most neuroaffirming employer who truly, if not gets neurodivergence, is at least willing to listen and learn and treats you as the expert that you are on your own neurosystem, and you'll still be up against so many challenges. So, I constantly try to help people separate individual responsibility from systemic. And it's not to say that we don't all have individual responsibility, because we do, but unfortunately, so many of our community have, really internalized a lot of this ableism and blame ourselves for our lack of access. And we blame ourselves for our inability to prevent burnout and to exist in this world. Anyway, so really, I sort of work overtime in trying to help people understand that it's so much bigger than the individual. And the reason I do that is because it's really at the core of being able to advocate for ourselves and to have our needs met, is that when you're trying to advocate for your rights coming from a place of shame and internalized ableism, it's so much harder than knowing that you can speak out and know that it's not on you. And so much of what we deal with in society around mental health and well-being is put on the individual, whether that's weight or mental health in general. It's all pushed back on the individual, rather than acknowledging that there is so many external factors that are at play here. And, like, for instance, Mel and I both shudder at the word resilience, because resilience is like one of the most common things we hear. We want to build resilience in people. People don't lack resilience. I'm going to tell you, autistic people are some of the most bloody resilient people I've ever met. Is my Aussie coming out? Bloody. Because we're constantly knocked down and we still get up. Like, it's not a resilience issue. It's an access issue. It's discrimination. It's oppression. And these are big words, right? And they sound very fancy and complex, and they are. But to be able to translate that into everyday language of what does that actually mean? Well, what that means is that you're not allowing me to make these small changes around how I communicate, how I show up, the hours I work, where I work from. All of those things directly impact my health and well-being and ability to maintain employment. And that is like taking big picture oppression, discrimination, ableism into very tangible actions. And that's really some of the hardest things to do, because, any minority group finds it challenging to talk about how they're struggling. And we talk about like white fragility, white people don't like hearing how we're racist. Most of us are, like, even if we've done a lot of work to unpack that. And it's similar in ableism. It's similar in all minority groups. Having to talk to your oppressor about how they are playing a part, consciously or not, in those systems of oppression is so challenging. And when you add to that, being a person who has a completely different way of communicating, which causes so much anxiety and so much stress on our already overstressed nervous system, It's a health crisis waiting to happen, if not continuously happening, to no surprise. Anyway, I'll get off my high horse.
Yes, all of that. And I think that when you're in the thick of it, because of that narrative that's been so over rehearsed of you are the problem, you are defective, that makes it all the more challenging. So you not only is the onus on you to advocate for your rights to your oppressor, but you think it's your fault.
Yep, exactly. Exactly, which just disempowers you and takes away any chance at getting your needs met and any, right that you have. Because this is, and I'm a lawyer and human rights is my thing. And, I think the thing that I see a lot in this space, especially because it's dominated by psychologists and psychiatrists who are obviously the autism experts, is that so many of them don't have any education in social systems, laws, frameworks, government, things that directly impact our health and well-being. And so really, this is, again, why I love Mel and her work and the people in our community who have really expanded their views from a very limited and narrow mindset that it is the product of the systems that we're in. Like, I'm not blaming health professionals at all or employers. We get trained and we get taught what we know, but it's also about taking responsibility and learning these bigger systems. I was just listening. I got a message yesterday from one of the people that just recently took my masterclass in eating disorders and supporting autistic people. And she sent me some screenshots of a newsletter that she got from her child's kindergarten, which is like preschool, daycare, whatever. And they basically wrote this big piece on, there's these two academics in Queensland here in Australia that wrote a book last year called Becoming Autistic. And just for anyone who doesn't know, when you hear that title, I don't know about you, but I thought to myself, oh, that's great. This is going to be about embracing your autistic identity, and it's going to be so empowering. No, it's not. They literally talk about how technology is causing autism. It's so bad. I literally was up till 2 a.m. unpacking the horribleness that is this thing. And they talk about how, like, theory of mind. I'm like, do you not know about the double empathy problem? It's been over a decade now. Really? How are you academics and you don't understand double empathy and autism? Anyway, I'm going on a rant. But my point is that these are the people who are influencing our system, who are seen as the experts, and who are, so much of our access is relied on this. Even in the legal system, I actually was in a car accident myself in my early 20s, and I had to go through our legal system to get a third-party insurance claim. And I'm a lawyer, so, I figured I'd have a hand up, even though I have no experience in personal injury law. But my neurodivergence was actively used against me in every step of the way in this lawsuit. And I'm going to use this as an example because I think it's really translatable to employment as well, in burnout and all of the things. But one of the things that happened was when I was not working for a period and really struggling, sit down, Moose, I was so burnt out, yet so bored. And I talk a lot about bore out in my work. And that's a big part of autistic burnout as well. But anyway, and they basically said to me, oh, you're lying because I made this Instagram account. It was like a makeup thing. I was obsessed with makeup for a period. It was like my only way of coping. But like my way of existing in the world was continuously attacked. And because I was putting like my highlight reel online, which was, I'd put makeup on my face maybe once a fortnight when I had an ounce of energy, and I'd put a post online. To them, they're like, oh, you look like you're doing well. And again, this isn't like, so much of this is invisible and hard to articulate, right? But what I'm trying to get at is so much of this comes down to what is our assumed knowledge of neurodivergence and how does that impact our ability to have our needs met? So when we go into work and say things like, I need to be able to work flexibly, and what does that look like and why? we're met with things like, well, I've done some research since you disclosed, and I know that the A, B, and C are common things that autistic people need at work, and this isn't one of them. What? Like, this is at the core of our issue, because autistic people, as most of you know, if you're listening, we're very diverse within our own community, and our needs are very different. And so if you're going off this cookie cutter research that is so limited and so much focused on, what they call profound autism, which is not a thing in my opinion, but is often really focused on autistic people with intellectual disability, which majority of the workforce, because we're so not in the workforce already because of discrimination and such, underemployed, all of those things.
I have a question, but I could have impulse controlled to keep my hand down.
Dive in.
No, go for it. Finish. Go.
No, so, well, I mean, the thing is that, oh, was that me?
I have no idea, but that's incredible. Where did that come
sorry,
from?
I bumped I've got this audio setup thing. It's got sound effects. Anyway, so our understanding, and if you look at things like high functioning autism, basically people say that we're not really that autistic, or we don't really have access needs. It's rubbish, because most of us just have the ability to hide these problems.
Right. Which is why
that just leads to more problems. Are harmful, so harmful.
Most of us have, just the fluctuating capacity.
Yeah, dynamic disability for a reason. And I don't even like support. So a lot of people say, oh, don't say high, low functioning, just say high, low support needs. And I'm like, that's also kind of quite limiting, because our support needs fluctuate depending on our environment, and there's so many different factors.
Around the time of my autism diagnosis, I lost the ability to motor plan brushing my teeth, and I couldn't get words out for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, but you're high functioning.
It's a motor disability.
Also, I think it's really important to acknowledge that people who either are gifted or even just don't have a co-occurring intellectual disability have a very unique set of challenges. And this is the community that face, higher rates of masking, higher rates of suicide. Giftedness is more than intellect. You can be creatively gifted, intuitively, all of those things. Basically, what it means is that your giftedness isn't recognized and your disability isn't supported. So you're in this phase of I'm not having my support needs met as a disabled person, but I'm also not getting recognized for some of the talents and skills that I do have. So it's a very, go Mel.
But also, I'd also say is that when we speak of internalized ableism, this population, one of the many challenges this population faces is that when it comes to asynchronous development or so-called scattered skills. So here I am, I'm a kid who does well at school, does maybe really well at school, but I math is holy anyway, so I'm oh, I hope they don't find out.
Yeah,
so
it's huge amounts of imposter syndrome, rejection sensitivity. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I use it. Yeah.
So the other piece that I just want to circle it back around, because I don't trust my ability to remember this.
Do it.
So I think, and maybe this is just my cynicism, I am concerned that often when people are in a place for advocating for their rights at work, I don't see many people prosper, because these environments are just so toxic. Whereas if there was already an environment where employees' individual thriving was prioritized, you wouldn't have to evoke your legal rights. Just be a conversation, because that's just how that goes. Which is why, talking about, I think unfortunately are in places where they have to invoke their legal rights. And why we talk about inclusion here is that, not only are at least 1 in 5 people neurodivergent, but often they don't know. So employers don't know, and the people don't know, which is why creating environments where people with all types of brains can thrive using principles of universal design, etc., it is so much better than waiting for people to have to fight And what do you think about that comment?
Oh, I love that so much. Honestly, it's at the core of what I do. So, I am a human rights lawyer, but I no longer practice like discrimination and human rights law per se. And in the suicide prevention space, they call suicide prevention has upstream and downstream. So downstream is where you're in crisis and you're calling emergency services, and upstream is like, let's do stuff that prevents you getting to that point. And so for my job, I see myself as an upstream human rights lawyer. So, and that's why I love talking about things like inclusion and access and universal design. How can we put things in place so we don't get to a point where we're having to go to court, where we're having to go to the Human Rights Commission, where we're having to fight for our basic rights? Because usually by that point, things are so toxic and it's so hard to come back from. And so I have a lot of my clients will come to me where they're in this middle phase of they're not quite at the stage where they're seeking, illegal action, but they're also not at the stage of, this nirvana that we're all keep striving for. And so it's this really fine balance of trying to work with employers who often really do mean well, but we have this very, deficit-based view and sort of, I don't know what the word for it is, but like tokenistic box ticking that, everyone starts to get their back up and they're like, oh, I don't want to do anything wrong and I want to meet my legal obligations as an employer, but I also don't want to deal with this stuff because it's taking away from the work I like doing or should be doing or whatever you want to put in there. And so it becomes very quickly can go downhill if you're not, getting the right support, or if you're just unlucky to have a not great employer. So really what I'm trying to do in my own work is very much focusing on how can we get employers to start thinking about this stuff far before we have to get labels or disclose or talk about our specific struggles, because that's, one, not very empowering, and two, does raise all these barriers of, preconceived stigma, stereotypes, all the challenges that we constantly have to deal with when we're barely struggling to exist to begin with, and it's all put on us as the individual to advocate for. So I am just that comment was gold. I'm all about that life.
I could talk to you all day. Can you talk about bore out?
Bore out, yeah. So bore out is one of my passions. So in burnout, when you hear people talking about autistic burnout, a lot of the time we'll talk about, pulling back on demands and really just trying to reset that sort of the pressure on our nervous system and such to come out of the burnout. But often what happens for most of the people I support is that we tend to struggle with a thing called bore out. So when you pull back on everything, there's this, sort of element of guilt, I guess, and shame around feeling like you can't do anything because you can't do these basic things like keep attending work or whatever. You shouldn't be able to do anything that you love. You shouldn't be able to hyper focus on your special interest or passion or whatever you want to call it, because you can't do the other stuff, when actually that can be a real remedy for us. So focusing, not getting into bore out as well, which is essentially, not being bored because you're not doing anything. You're pulling back so much from the demands of life that you're not able to do what is really interesting and fulfilling for you. And so really I try to talk about with my clients who are in burnout recovery, really trying to balance that, pulling back on demands while also filling up your cup, replenishing your spoons. And for a lot of autistic people, that is leaning into your special interests, that is giving yourself permission to still do the things that do fill you up, even though to an outsider, what that can look like often, and this really is quite common for parents or spouses or whatever, is that they're like, oh, well, you can't work, but you can spend all day doing ABC. That's bullshit. That's rubbish. No, you're missing the point. Right? Go on, Mel.
Right. I mean, what I would add to this is just from a brain science standpoint. So autistic and ADHD brains are dopamine bound brains. We need dopamine literally for everything. Dopamine feels good to everybody, but we need dopamine.
We need it.
We need it, not just for like, motivation, engagement, attention. We need it for like motor function and coordination and starting and stopping an activity, starting and stopping an idea. And so when you are not getting enough dopamine, whether because, as you said, you're not doing something interesting, you're not moving, or you're not eating protein and water, which gets very circular because if you have interoception processing differences, you may not be hungry or thirsty, or from an executive functioning situation, it may be difficult to access those things, or from a financial perspective, given that autistic people are 2.5 to 4 times more likely to be unemployed, less likely to be able to, that's another barrier to accessing sufficient protein to make enough dopamine. Anyway, it gets like very, very circular.
And the ADHD tax and, not being able to manage your finances, which is a huge part of just being able to have money regardless of employment and income.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what we talk about with our medical patients here is part of burnout recovery is like thinking about like dosing and frequency, intensity of your experiences. So like if it fills my cup to interact with you, it does not mean I should interact with you for 3 hours.
Yes.
Even though that often is what happens, but then I like can't talk after that. Like I probably should, set an alarm or something.
For many of us, workplaces have been shaped by exclusion, shame, survival mode. But naming those truths can be a first step toward change, even if all we can do right now is shift our own expectations or find words for our experiences. We're so grateful to Annie Crowe for sharing her insight, advocacy, and expertise, helping us imagine what a different kind of workplace can look like. You can connect with Annie on LinkedIn and by following her website and podcast, which we will link in the show notes. If you want to keep exploring with us, you can join our live Brain Club events most Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can also dig into our free digital resource library with all the recordings from the past 4 years at allbrainsbelong.org. You're not alone, and we're glad you're here. See you next time.